now we get to start having some fun. And truly, I want you to deviate from my plans at this point. We're in this 8th section, we are going to be making the exterior panels, the looks of our design. And I'm going to show you techniques, just a simple groove with bridle joints for it to hold the panel in, and you can use those for a lot of different styles of work. I'm going to play around with some cloud lifts and just go from there, and maybe even a little miniature, what do they call those? Shiplaps? But again, this is playtime. And if you have a spouse that you're kind of having to justify your cost with them, this is a time to ask them for their opinion. Hey, I'm practicing a new technique. Is there a style you want me to practice so that maybe I can build something for our house? Because again, if all you're making is IKEA clones, that's all they're going to expect you to be able to do. This is time to flex some muscle, experiment, and if it messes up, you can explain, hey, I know next time how to do it right. I mean, this is a learning experience. So flex your design muscles. I mean, if you want to do copper dowels as kind of a jailhouse look or something like that, do it. So, last evening, I went ahead and dimensioned all the parts for my design of both the exterior and the 3 interior panels that we're going to have to make for what I'm doing. And it's really going to be fairly simple. But I'm going to show you a lot of tricks because as much as you plan, I'm afraid this square is never going to be square. Now, I can never explain things like this because, you know, when I glued it up, I squared it up. It was square in the clamps. But whenever I come over here after the end, this one right here, maybe 1/4 of a degree. I mean, you can hear it. A little bit of flex. This side right here, that one's dead perfect. Can't do better than that. But then I come over here, and you know, I can see a little bit of light on the bottom, and I go over there, and you know, it's kind of, you'll see a little light here, a little light there, which means you're, you know, a fraction of a degree off, which kind of means you cannot make a perfectly square panel if you want to minimize your gaps as much as possible. And as a practice piece, that's what we're going to be doing. So I'm actually going to be fitting these pieces. I'm not just going to take a measurement. I'm going to fit them so that I can capture all the angles I want. So the first thing I'm going to do is go through each one of these sections. I know that my long pieces are going to be on the bottom and top. My short pieces are going to be here. But in order to get the bridle joints to work, they have to go all the way through. Now, you will not see the end grain of the joints because they're going to be up here, so I don't really have to worry about having grooves exposed or anything like that. So that's my design idea. So right now, I'm going to go through and size up all these. Now, my design does mean I have to have a small ledge on the inside because I'm actually going to be resting stuff on these ledges to anchor the interior panels. So to do all of these are about 1.5 inches. You know, I just milled them down. They aren't a perfect 1.5 inches, but they're close enough. And I'm going after this kind of layered look, meaning all these pieces right here are inset just a tad bit, so I don't have to worry about flushing things up. I just think it's a little bit more elegant look. It requires less labor, and it's kind of how the Green and Green brothers did it. And since I'm going with cloud lifts, that's kind of the style I want. So if I bring my panels back about the same amount, you know, 1/4 of an inch in, well, 1/4 of an inch on each side, that leaves this roughly 3/4 of an inch. So I did go ahead and, when I milled up all my stock, pretty much every part that's going to be part of the panel is 3/4 of an inch. So that you'll set it back a little bit and leave that ledge that I need so much for my design. Now, as usual, the first step is picking out your boards, you know, figuring out grain direction and stuff like that. A lot of that you took care of when you milled it up. Me specifically going for as quarter sawn material as I could find. I wasn't concerned with the grain look of the stuff that's going to be glued up. I really wanted clean faces and I wanted stable wood. But wood doesn't always stay stable. I might have jointed an edge and then taking it off with a table saw hoping I would get perfect boards, but you need to check that. This board right here, you can tell, has a little light gap in the middle. If I reverse it, little light gap on the ends. So one of these two boards has warped. So when you are laying out your boards, I would suggest that if you have, like this one's warped dipping down in the middle, you oriented the board as best you can so that you will be squeezing the edges up to make it flatten out against this top board right here. That way the pieces that come up will be your clamp to get it all flush with the tops. If you were to do it this way, you would have to do these and then get another clamp in the middle to make it tight. Now, that's about as big a gap as I normally get in these things, and I can squeeze that light gap in between these two boards together with my fingers. So it's not going to take much pressure. But it might continue to warp a little bit more in the future. It might not. If it does, at least it will warp so it snugs itself up. Now we are going to be fitting each one of these pieces to its individual slot on this area. So marking what board goes where is critical. And I don't mark these boards themselves because they're done. Yeah, it's straight off the table saw, but that's about as high as I'm going to go for finish. So blue tape becomes critical here. So lay out the boards to where they're going to be and then do something to mark them so that as we cut them, they will go back to the same spot. So how I mark these out is I take the piece that I've got dedicated to this spot. I personally put the markings on the inside. That way, even if it bleeds through or something, it's not going to be able to see. Because this is recessed a little bit, I put a little piece of wood that's consistent. I'll use the same piece for the entire project so that I can just come over and rest this on it to get the same spot. And then I will clamp both sides to the work so that I know it cannot move. So it is now parallel with the rail and it is clamped tight on both sides. So I can then take a chisel, lay it down flat, and using one of those corners just kind of mark the layout. I'll do that on both sides. And the reason why I'm using a chisel instead of my marking gauge is because my marking gauge, well, I can't get it in there because of this distance. So that's where I return to the chisel, because it will lay flat and transfer a straight line across this rounded corner. Doing this for every single board will definitely take longer, but you know you've captured any error in angles automatically. I mean, it's just kind of intuitive in the setup. Then after marking it, I immediately come over and I will lay out a 90 degree. Just drag until I find that chisel line. Mark it down. And come over and start sawing. Starting on the far corner, lining across the top, then focusing on coming down this side over here, which has that line. And that way, whenever I ride it up, it should be dead on perfect. There we go. And do the other side the same way. Grab my 90. Find the chisel line. Mark. And saw. Now the reason why I use a hand saw is because that angle that I marked with the chisel, once again, it might be a fraction of a degree off. But in all seriousness, with a hand saw, I don't know the difference. I'm just sawing to whatever line shows up. I can't really do that consistently with a table saw. So find out where you had it placed and then go test it out. So left top, going up top. Let's see. It should be tight enough that you cannot angle it. It's just going to go in just dead perfect. Yeah, even the slightest angle and it's kind of tight to come in. I'd say that's a pretty good fit. So, now time to fit the rest of them. So, now that you've got all the panels that's going to fit inside sized, all except for these two right here. And they're going to go right about there in my design, and I can't size them until after I carve these two in that cloud lift. So I'm setting these side apart, but they need to be with this kit because at this point in time we need to put a groove in all of these for the panels to slide into, the little 1/4 inch boards that I'm using in my design. And these we're going, because these are going to house a panel here and here, they need to have a slot cut on both sides. So this is the time I will, because I'm somewhat stupid sometimes, go ahead and put all my pieces where they're going to go, and then I can mark that I need a panel going through here. I need a panel, a groove going through here. I need a groove going through here. I mark the spots where all my grooves are going to go because I know if I don't, I will put them on the wrong side. This is just a step for me to alleviate a little bit of my incompetency. Now, there are a lot of different ways you can cut grooves in these kind of things. You can do it with a table saw. I mean, just set it up, run it. If you're doing it with a table saw and you want to make sure you get in the dead center, run it one way, flip it, run it the other way. You could use, in the hand tool world, they have something called a grooving plane, a slot cutting plane that's set up exactly for this kind of stuff. Put a 1/4 inch blade in there because I'm using 1/4 inches for my panels, and set up the distance over, have at it. And if you have a tool like, I use this grooving plane for all my drawer bottoms. It cuts a 1/4 inch groove, a 1/4 inch over, a 1/4 inch deep. This is perfectly set up for it. You could even do it both directions. Oh, I need to tighten up my blade. But this is something I normally have set up back there that has a one-purpose goal. And yeah, I will probably start making these again sometime in late 2020. But one tool I haven't used before to make slot grooves like this is my router table. And whenever I first started designing this, and I was buying some stuff at one of the local retailers, I saw a video that somebody was using a slot cutting bit for making boxes. So I have a 1/4 inch slot cutter. I'm going to try that on my new router table. Plus, I've kind of got to set it up here to get some alignment for those two back pieces, because they're going to have to line up with the router plate clearance, because that's going to create part of the box. It's going to close the router plate for dust collection. So I need to at least get some measurements, and the best way to do it is just relatively. Take them directly off of the piece. So this thing is basically an arbor and a little mini table saw blade with 3 carbide cutters. Each cutter is about a 1/4 inch, and I can stack these to create, buying different blade sizes to create different depths. I do know I got this 1/4 inch one and a 1/8 inch one, because that would allow me to make 1/8, 1/4, and 3/8 inch slots and different stuff, and those are the most common sizes I use. It was a bit confusing for me because this is a Freud unit, and the little table saw bit had 2 slots in it, but the arbor did not, and it kind of wobbled a tad bit on the arbor. But whenever I put these washers on it, which were there so that the nut would have actual threads, because the arbor is smooth up to about that point right there, yeah, everything tightened up. To set it up, since this is a 1/4 inch, I basically just put it so that my 1/4 inch brass rod would fit underneath it. So I figured that a 1/4 inch plus a 1/4 inch on top will give me the 3/4 inch that I'm using on all those long pieces of my mini frames. How far in to go into the slot is somewhat confusing for me. So I figure if I were to push this right here, this is a 3/8 inch slot, I could bring this forward just enough so that that 3/8 inch slot would just touch it right there, and that'll give me a 3/8 inch depth of the slot. So just bring it a little bit farther forward, and that'll work for almost all the pieces except for the bottom and top stretchers, and that way those I'm going to have to do a 1/2 inch because I'm going to be doing some shaping there, and that makes more sense later on. But this depth isn't that critical. So for consistency, I have my pencil mark on the side I'm going to be removing. I'm going to make sure that I put the show face down, that way the tape doesn't snag on anything, and they will all be referenced off of this face and this face for height, but it is pretty much dead center anyways. That's just a force of habit I had from other tools I use. The reference edge, that way if you aren't in the center, at least in the panel they will all be lined up. I'm also going to be doing two different, this right here, I have a feeling I need something to keep it pressed down flat just in case there's any warpage in any of the batch. And to press it in, I'm using a second push stick that's a little bit smaller. So here we go. Then on the long pieces, I'm going to make an adjustment to the fence so that I'm taking a 1/2 inch cut. And that second pass will just mean I'm not taking off as much as material at one shot. So here's how easy it is to change a bit in this router thing. And one of the key reasons why I bought this rocker one was for this one little feature right here. Well, two features. I got a button. Ooh. Pops that off. And then they have a quick adjuster to raise up the bit. I've never been able to remove a bit on the old router table without that. I also got, they sell custom wrenches for different routers. This one's specifically for my Porter cable. What I like about it is, see this little clip right there? I mean, how many times are you having to constantly undo these? This just kind of finds the top perfectly. Oops, wrong way. Easy to fit. There we go. Voila. I don't know why tapping on top always seems to loosen the bit a little bit more for me. I guess it's opening up the collet some. Now for the next operation, I'm going to try and make those little shiplap joints for the little thing. So I've got this, I guess it's a dado bit, what you would call it. So drop it down to its base, lift it up a little bit, tighten up on the collet so it stays there. You don't want your bits to be on bottom. Somebody can tell me why, that's just a rule. And there we go, tighten it up. Then you find the right collet size. Oops, that one looks like it's going to be perfect once I get it lowered down. Just snap that puppy in. And then size it, the bit for where you want. It's got the quick raise and quick lower, and as in everything, you always want to raise up to your height. You don't want to lower down because there's a little slop in there. Now I have this kind of, it's going to cut a flat side and a flat top bit on in here, and my objective in creating these lap joints is I want to take precisely half the height of this one, a little bit on one side and a little bit more on the other side. So when I bring the two together, they will overlap, but there will be a slight gap in between them, and that will give me that shiplap look. Right now, I could glue these all up together and have a really nice flat panel, but I'm just trying something. We're playing, and this is just a shop project. So let's try it out. Let me hit the shop vac. And there we go. After raising it up a bunch of times, a 64th at a bit, I get a really tight joint. You know, that would be the best glue joint because you have lots of long grain to long grain. But I want to create, so I'm going to do all of them with one side like that. And then I'm going to bump it back a little bit and do the other side, the opposite corner. Now in adjusting how much more to take off, I do know if I have an anchor point on that side and an anchor point on this side, if I put my finger right here, loosen this side up, because this is half the distance, I can basically adjust how big a gap I want by doing double the distance between my fingernail and however much I move it over. I close that up and let's test it out and see how much of a gap I have. So there's about 1/16 of an inch. They are completely together. And I think as people walk around it, it'll probably give a nice little shadow line. We'll try it out. At least the gap will be consistent on every single one, so it'll have a look. Now, something to consider. I'm kind of surprised at how little sawdust has fallen down from all this routing I've been doing. Cutting the grooves and cutting those half flaps. My dust deputy, with a 5-gallon thing, it's about a third full of shavings, and I really have a little bit of splattering down here, and most of that I believe came from that first time I turned it on for one of my camera takes when I forgot to turn my vacuum cleaner on. This dust thing is getting more dust than I anticipated, and I could see really being able to improve it is that if I was sitting here all day long putting a piece of tape to block off a little bit more air to get more suction over that bit. I'm going to build the case so that I could add dust collection in the future, but I'm not going to actually hook it up for now. I'm going to leave it for just this. That's my thinking at the moment. So right now I have this entire thing positioned exactly how I want it. So I'm making pencil marks around the case so I can reposition it here on the underside. And I also need to mark where my slots are going to be so that I can get the maximum drawer space and minimize the space that air is going to be around here. So if I do add a dust collection system, it's sucking more of the air in here. There's just less room. It will have more power, I guess you would say. And that's as far as I can go over, because it will hit that piece right there. But on this side, I can come in quite a bit. So it's going to end up being asymmetrical, but it'll still work. So once you get the top off, transfer those lines all the way down and make sure you mark where the tenon's actually going to be. Once again, I'm using 3/4 in here, so this little marking gauge is 3/4. So that's how I figured out that distance. So there's where my tenon's going to be over the front. Here's where it's going to be on the back. This one being the key one on the inside. So transfer those to the front, so you will know all your alignments. Now the reason I like doing the grooves in the bridle grooves first when I'm cutting bridle joints, because it kind of gives you a measurement of what you're cutting off. I mean, a bridle joint is basically a finger joint, except instead of going widthwise, you're going lengthwise, and you're going to be coming down, you know, roughly a different distance. Now in our versions, is not equal distance, because this is shorter. The uprights are shorter than the long rights. You're only coming over so far. And once again, you could put it into the frame and measure it out pretty closely. But because we're not going the long distance, I think you can wiggle room a little bit with a little bit of compression, since this is also the long grain. So I'm going to just cut these out using either a marking gauge or the table saw. Probably the table saw, because I want to play around with that one. But all we're doing is a finger joint, where the short pieces are going to be the tenon that come up inside the groove of the long pieces. Now, normally when I cut bridle joints, you know, the whole idea is you have a lot of glue area to create a lot of strength. And this is for a traditional picture frame. So you would come over here, and I would now cut out this center section. But when I was cutting the tenons right here, again, this being a learning exercise, my thinking was, this is going to be such an under-stressed frame. Really, let's save ourselves some time. Instead of hollowing out the center section, let's just cut these short, because I have a good 1/2 inch of groove in there. That's more than enough glue surface, especially considering this entire side is going to be glued up too. So instead of doing the traditional Morrison bridle joint, I think I'm just going to cut off the tenon a little short and put it in the groove, glue it into the groove. Yeah, I think that'll work pretty good. Now, as I said, panels are where we get to play. And I'm going to be putting some small cloud lifts on the tops and bottoms of all these panels. So now I just get to kind of guesstimate where I want them. So the panels themselves are 13 inches. If I were to divide that up by 3, that'd be, you know, 4 1/3 inches. So how much is that? 4 1/3, that'd be, no, that's way too much. If I were to divide that up into a third again, that'd be a little over 1.5 inches, so right there. No, that sounds about right. Let's just say, well, yeah, how about we just do, and 1.25 inches, because this is 1.25 inches, and 1.25 inches in would be right about there. Yeah, I'll go for that. So I need to set my table saw up so it takes about 1/4 inch cut. And then set a stop block so I can come in that far. And you know, if you're a little bit off here, that's not that big a deal. This is a purely cosmetic cut. And there we go. Now, in the past, when I cut cloud lifts like this, you know, I would have done it with a handsaw. I would cut either side, and then you could have done a relief cut, stuck that in your vise, and use your chisel and spoke shave, and maybe a card scraper to remove this middle. I have even used a technique where you set your bandsaw fence about 1/4 inch in, and then you kind of ease it in on this side, kind of come down, and then reverse it, and then just smooth it out with a card scraper. But we've now got a router table. So let's try out a technique there that I haven't done before. I've got that same router bit in there, and I am just going to kind of extend it out so it will take one side of this thing. No need to take both sides. No need to be greedy. And because I have this slot perfectly, well, a little bit size for that, I can just somewhat eyeball where it meets up for my start and stop points. So what I'm going to want to do is anchor it on this side so it is anchored to something. Ease it in while moving forward, pushing this to that line. Come all the way over until I get close to that line, pull it out, then I can clean up whatever's left with a chisel. Well, that was fun. So let's finish it up. Now when you're making these, all you really need to do is worry about the show side. Now on the long stretchers that are going to be in back, I did take off both sides simply because I am going to have something coming down in the middle, and it'd be easier to cut both shoulders if they were level. But all the other ones, you know, all I really was concerned with was getting rid of the material on the show side. The back side, just leave it for a little, I guess, structural integrity. Now the Green brothers were the guys that kind of brought, you know, cloud lifts to the forefront, and all it was a little bit of a cheat so that you didn't have to have corners as tight. So you just kind of round over the corner, and some people will extend it into the body. So for example, I'm going to take my knife and I'm just going to make an indent right there so that I can bring the cloud lift down a little bit by carving into that cut. This is details that nobody's ever going to notice. Then just grab a little sandpaper, finish it up, and there we go. A tiny little cloud lift. Now, because I'm trying to fit these to their spot on the case and the frame, I'm going to glue them up a little bit oddly. So I want you to follow along with what I'm about to do. first thing, this is not glued up right now. This is just dry fit, okay? And these are going to fit into each one the slot. They go in, you know, about a ½ inch or so, like that. So if I come over here and I can begin laying them out, I'm going to have an odd number of these. My issue is I want this panel to be somewhat balanced as far as, you know, how the lines come out. If it's kind of one way or the other, it might look funny. So before I glue this up, I'm going to come over here. I know this panel comes in about 1/4 inch, so I can come over here and identify how much of these two outside boards I need to take off. And yes, that is leaving a little bit of room for them to expand and contract, but I don't need to leave too much because these are thin enough that, and these little grooves are thin enough that more than likely they will crush a little bit if they expand too much. But I'm giving them a little bit of room. From there, I have the two ones I'm going to need to cut short, and those are going to be the exterior sides. Next, I'm going to glue up just the bottom 2 rungs. I don't want to glue up this top section, just these bottom 2, because I'm going to put them in the frame, and I'm going to use the frame to make sure I get the angles perfect. A few clamps in each one of the corner will bring them perfectly sized, and it's going to capture that angle that might be in error that we discussed earlier. So in about an hour, I will pull this out, pull that top section on, slide in those slats after I've cut those 2 sides, glue up this right here, and at that point in time, I will put glue on the inside, and this thing will be in there for good. Now the second time we are putting this in, it's going in for good. So get it started a little bit and then put the glue on the inside where it's going to be. Just a little bit. It doesn't need a lot of holding strength to stay in there. That's all we're doing right now, is getting it to stay in there. So, you know, a few dabs here and there, not that big a deal. Then I'm trying to create an even reveal on the outside, and thus creating an even platform on the inside. So I'm using this 3/8 inch, which 3/8 plus 3/8 plus a 3/4 in the middle. That should allow me to place this right in the dead center. So just tap it in until you get an even platform all the way around. Feels good. Then we can take care of the blue tape, because we don't need that anymore. Get rid of any glue squeeze out. And admire our handiwork. A quick rinse and repeat, and I've done the back and the right hand side. After testing it out, you know, I was going to put 2 individual stretchers about in line with these 2 panels in here, but in the end I just decided just go ahead and put it all the way through. I thought it looked a little bit cleaner, and in the future, if I ever add dust collection, I'll have it coming up underneath. And the other thing I did differently is on this side, I did not glue this panel in. I just put glue on the tenons, and I did glue in the groove all the way around. So these are going to be a little bit more solid than these other sides, but this whole panel as a unit can be pulled out and in, because I'm going to need to be putting the start-stop button over here on the side, and if anything happens with the electronics or something like that, I want to be able to remove it. And in actuality, in a future step, I'm going to be anchoring these panels a lot more securely with some internal fasteners that are going to help with the drawer slides. So, the next step, let's do the internal panels that'll form the box around our router table, or router, or whatever you call that individual unit. The upside down router part. See you in a little bit.